That loud enough for everybody to hear? Justin, did you hear that authoritative pound of the... All right, welcome to the Thursday, September 28th installment of our Utah Wildlife Board meeting. Let's begin with some introductions. If we'll just start over there with Steve and introduce yourself, we'll move right across the board.
Yes, my name's Steve Dalton. I'm from the southern region. I live in Teasdale. Thank you.
Kevin Albrecht from Farron, and I'm representing the Southeast region.
Calvin Crandall from Springville in the Central region.
Byron Bateman from South Weber, and I represent the Northern region.
Mike Fowlks, I'm the director for the Utah Division of Wildlife Resources.
Donnie Hunter, Cedar City, Southern region.
Carl Hurst, Orem City, Central region.
And I'm Kirk Woodward. I'm from the Northeastern region. Just obviously we have a short agenda meeting. We don't have a lot of public today, but a reminder of the process. We will, and we do appreciate it, even with a small meeting today. We appreciate and are very mindful of that public process. I think that this process works well and is a small part of the success that we've seen in the state in managing wildlife here. So this meeting in particular means something to that success that we've had over the last little while. So we'll continue with our same agenda, the published agenda, and we will proceed in the same manner that we've always proceeded. We remind you that this is publicized, or I guess not publicized, what's the word, transmitted. It's an open public meeting here, but it's also on the YouTube channel for people to tune in. So make sure that everything that you say is appropriate for such a meeting. Let's begin with an approval of the agenda. Has anybody had the time to look over the agenda and be able to make a motion to approve that agenda? Steve?
I'll second that.
And Crandall? Yeah, it's kind of feeling like a church meeting all of a sudden. All right, I have a motion and a second. All in favor? It appears to be unanimous. All right, now I'm really off my game. All right.
That's okay.
Have you had a minute to look over the minutes? And if so, let's. This meeting or the last meeting? Of the last meeting, yeah. I did notice one change that's needed. I've already pointed it out to Staci. It has me listed as both the chairman and the vice chair in one spot, and so just wanted to make sure that was changed. So Byron needs his job.
With that, Mr. Chairman, I approve we approve the minutes. I move that we approve the minutes of the last board meeting.
Have a motion. Do I have a second? Second. All in favor? Okay, it's unanimous. All right, let's turn some time over to Byron for old business and action log. I think we've got quite a bit here to at least run through that was due. I think if you've looked over the minutes or over the Wildlife Board agenda and the materials that Staci sent out, there's quite a bit there that I hope you've gone over and thought about. So,
Justin, that brings us up to you then to take care of the action log and go through those items listed in any order you want to do them in.
So to begin, let's see. Oops. There we go. The first motion action log item that I'd like to address is the motion to have the division look at the possibility of a second general season rifle deer hunt on select units that run 5 days during the spike elk hunt with no weekends, and that the Zion and Pine Valley units be considered. So where we're at with that is this November, the division plans to recommend early rifle deer hunts on the following units. In the northern region, we're planning on recommending these on the Camas, Chalk Creek, East Canyon, Morgan South Rich units. In the southeastern region, we're having discussions about the 9 Mile unit, and then in the southern region, Fillmore, Fish Lake, Panguitch Lake, Pine Valley, and Zion. The season dates for these would be October 10th through the 14th, and so where that fits in the calendar is these spike and general any weapon or any bull hunts would start on October 6th, and so they'd have a Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday time frame where spike and any bull hunters could hunt. And then that Wednesday, October 10th, we would start these early rifle seasons. And so they would overlap these general season hunts, and they would go Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So it'd be a 5-day hunt, which would include a weekend. And then the last 4 days of the general season spike and any bull hunts, again, would have no deer hunters on it. And there's some good reasons to do this. One is to reduce crowding. As we've gone through the rack process the last several years, we've heard about crowding on a lot of units, especially units where we have high buck-to-doe ratios and need to reduce those to fit within our management targets. And so this would give us an avenue to add more permits and reduce some of these crowding issues. And then another one is we get a lot of feedback through the public process that oftentimes we have limited days that hunters can take off. And so if we can provide opportunities to hunt deer and elk at the same time, that's favorable. So, and that's our report for this action log item. I'm not sure how the board wants to do this. Do you guys want to have discussion, or should we just go through?
Well, you're going to present that in November, correct?
Correct, yeah, yep. So
And the way I see it, we asked for 2 units to be considered, and you gave us 8?
2, 3. Yes, I think we're going to recommend this on a, and these still might change. We still have some inner workings to do, but this is kind of our general thinking right now. So
That was on all units that are exceeding the buck-to-doe ratio is what that was to look at.
yes. Yeah. Oh, it was to look at all of them that we're exceeding?
Well,
Well, it says Zion and Pine Valley units be considered
Yes,
is
yes.
what was on the action log item, but I think the intent was to do exactly what he said, reduce
look at-
crowding, lower buck-to-doe ratios on units that are.
Yes, you're correct.
Oh.
Right. And yeah, that was the goal. Some units are just perennially over objective, and so we wanted to find avenues to increase opportunity there. So
And these would be a set number of permits for those various areas.
yeah, we'd work that out in the spring. I think in November when we come, we would present the framework and the structure and say here would be the season dates, and then we'd come back to you in the spring and with population or with permit numbers to populate those hunts.
Would you anticipate those tags coming from, so we would lower the regular hunt to add these, or add these on top?
Probably a combination of both. I think there's some that we could add permits on the front end and call that good, and then there's other instances where we would add permits but also take some from the normal deer hunt and put them into the early to reduce some of that crowding. Yeah, so
So it'd be kind of a mix and match, just depending on where it is and what the numbers are and what it'd look like. Doing just some shifting and some juggling around then with the numbers.
yeah, and the purposes. What are we trying to accomplish with it? Yes, correct. Yep.
Okay.
Justin, wasn't there one more on the north slope that we were worried about timing because those deer moved at the normal season? They moved into Wyoming.
Yeah, so we already have a hunt in place on that, and that's actually a limited entry hunt. So this this action log item, we just kept it to the general season hunts. So that North Slope hunt, though, we already
I
have in
remember
place.
that now.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
So yeah, it's fine.
Thank you.
next.
Okay, next. Thank you. The next action log item was to have the division look at the possibility of limited entry late season muzzleloader hunts on general season units with buck-to-doe ratios at or above the objectives. And just to familiarize everyone, the current strategy in the statewide deer plan says this. This is really the root of what we're talking about. The strategy says explore hunting bucks in late October or early November on general season units to provide additional limited entry hunting opportunity. So that's the purpose. And it says if warranted, hunting would only occur when general season units managed for 18 to 20 bucks per 100 does exceed their objective. Permits would be very limited in number and would be part of the bonus point draw system. So this was our starting point. This was the structure we've been working under over the last 3 years. And the motion is to expand this not just to units that are managed for 18 to 20 bucks per 100 does and that are exceeding that. It's to have it for all. Those managed for 15 to 17 and 18 to 20, as long as we're meeting that minimum number. So that's the motion, and that's where we're at. So a little bit of data to some background. The limited entry draw odds were really interesting. This summer, as we were reviewing this action log item, we talked about how difficult it was in Utah to draw a limited entry elk permit. And so we ran the numbers, and many of us were surprised that it's more difficult to draw a limited entry deer permit in Utah than elk, and especially the numbers. So for deer, it's 1 in 33. For elk, it's 1 in 24, and pronghorn, it's 1 in 13. So there is a need to address some of the point creep issues that are occurring for limited entry deer hunting. This table was shown to the Wildlife Board 6-8 months ago. I think Lindy Varney presented it. What it shows is the late limited entry buck deer muzzleloader hunts. And as you can see on the units that we've tried this on, we had about 2,500 applicants. We issued just 167 permits, and hunters were using 7 to 15 bonus points in order to obtain these permits. So the demand was high. If you look at the state, those areas highlighted in yellow are our typical limited entry units for deer, and scattered among those are other yellow units that have this late season limited entry muzzleloader hunt. So the units that we're talking about are those areas in white, where those are general season units either managed for 15 to 17 or 18 to 20 that don't have this opportunity. And as of last November, every unit in the state was meeting or exceeding their buck to doe ratio statewide. Like I've said earlier, we had a few years to get some feedback on these types of hunts, and the hunter satisfaction on these hunts is high. Anything over 3 is good, and on these, and we've averaged 3.5 out of 5 on these late season limited entry hunts. Some of the feedback, this is one that I commonly find in the comments section as I read through the notes, is great hunt. I wish it would have been later in the rut. I get that. I think if I had that permit, I would also want it to be later in the rut, but that's not the reality of this hunt. As we worked through this with the mule deer committee several years ago, this is one that we were torn on, whether we should have this limited entry hunting opportunity. But short of turning a general season unit into a limited entry unit to address point creep and limited entry, this was the avenue we thought we could have the best of both worlds. You could still have that general season hunting opportunity and still provide limited entry hunting opportunity on the back end, similar to what Colorado does. They determine their limited entry hunts on time of year, and it's not solely predicated on the buck to doe ratio. The last thing I want to point out before I get to our recommendation moving forward is, since we've had a few years to evaluate this hunt strategy, it does kind of send a mixed message, and that is we're going to manage for 18 to 20 bucks per 100 does. That's what our biologists aim for, and that's what the public expects. However, if you don't reach that and you're over that, then you get rewarded with a limited entry hunt. And that's been a point of discussion and conflict at times, because some have come to the division and asked, can you cut general season permits or just don't increase them so that way we can preserve that limited entry hunting opportunity or get it on some of these units? And I don't think we've fully thought through that as a committee, and I didn't as a big game coordinator as I put this together, but now having some time to reflect and look back, the strategy does send a bit of a mixed message. So with that background and that information, moving forward, the division plans to recommend to have late season limited entry hunts on all general season units that are meeting their minimum buck to doe ratios this November. So that's a recommendation that you'll likely see from the division. And that's all I have for this agenda item.
Any questions?
So that'll come up then in November with this others that, okay, we're going to recommend it, and then by the time you get the numbers, it'll be a 2018 hunt.
Correct, yes.
Okay.
I think it's a good start right there, Justin, with that, give people more opportunity. And I like ours better than Colorado's, because it's actually based on what you have available for the public to hunt. long as we exceed those numbers. And if we don't, then you would cut that hunt back.
Yes.
When you say late season, how late season?
It's
I mean,
generally-
the deer hunts from basically the last, week in October, not quite the last week, third week to fourth week of October. Would this be into a November, late November?
Yeah.
Right after the general season hunt, the next day this limited entry starts, or?
It's normally not the next day. It's the next. It's 3 days after. So it
You
start that following Wednesday.
Give some time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it would fall with the muzzleloader hunt?
Correct.
Same time?
Yeah, it
during that
overlaps
time?
the general season muzzleloader hunt for elk, and so which is normally starts the end of October and ends.
It's 3 days after the season
yeah,
closes when it starts.
Correct. But normally this hunt's done by November 10th at the very latest. Normally it's about 7th or so. Okay. Ready for the next one? Okay. The next action log item is to have the division look at adding a velvet-only buck hunt in November on the Ponsagat unit to address cactus bucks. And a little bit of background, if you'll remember, there's been some, over the last several years, the prevalence rates of these cactus bucks on the Ponsagat unit continues to increase. They're showing up more and more in our classification data, and the sportsmen are seeing them as well. And we've had a lot of discussion on them. And where we're at is with this action log item is the division plans to recommend a cactus buck hunt, which would be velvet only, on the Ponsagat unit this November. And again, we would recommend it this November. We'd put permits to it this spring, and hunters would be hunting in 2018. Cactus hunts will need to be defined in R657-5, what a cactus buck is. So that'll be something that you see this November as we bring out a rule change defining that. Season dates will be early to mid-November for 2018. And again, the purpose of the hunt is to provide additional limited entry deer hunting opportunities and reduce cactus bucks on the Ponsagat unit.
Just on this unit?
Yes, for now. I mean,
For now.
This is a unit that we've seen.
An abnormally high number of oddballs, if you will.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From that picture, I knew it was socially unacceptable to go out with curlers in your hair, but
Yeah.
I didn't know it was punishable by issuing a tag to pursue you.
Any number of tags, are we looking at 10? Are we looking at 100?
We're not looking at 100.
Not that many off right just yet.
No, I think we'd start out low, and I hate to put a number to it because I haven't got from Josh. I'm really interested in what the biologist sees in his classification data this year.
Mm-hmm.
In the past, though, we've seen 20 cactus bucks in a Johnson Canyon and some of those areas, if you're familiar with it. And so I'm not sure what they'll recommend starting at, but we want it to be a good hunting opportunity and address some of the management issues we've discussed.
I guess there's somebody wants to go out and get one of these. I guess you'd call them oddballs.
Yeah.
I mean, it's obviously a little bit different. I don't know that I'd want that one hanging on my wall. It's on the picture, but some of these that are a little bit different may not be. Look, we got an oddball. Look at this one.
Yeah, and that's a good point. The normal hunters on these units can take these. They just rarely do, and there's a few reasons for that. One is the curlers. I've heard them referred to as Marge Simpson. I won't say which meeting that was in, but they're just interesting deer, and a lot of hunters are selecting for bigger, more typical type antler growth, and so this would be a strategy to get at some of this. So.
Are there any studies still going on, Justin, on the cactus bucks?
That are still going on?
Yeah.
No, we didn't ask the board for additional permits this year. We learned a lot from last year. I think Annette came and reported on that to the board. But moving forward, this provides us a list of hunters to select from if we wanted to do additional studies and learn some more on what's driving this. But no, we didn't call for additional hunts this year for it.
So with that, none of these will be harvested this year.
Correct. Yeah, this will
other
be for
than
2018.
if somebody chooses on the limited entry hunt.
Yeah.
That would be general season,
No, this would
limited entry.
it would be limited entry. So
5 or 9 days, just
probably 9. Oh, well, probably more than 9, because this is. I'm not sure what amount of points hunters would spend on this, but they're not always easy to find. And they're there, and we see them when they're grouped up, and so I think we'd want to give hunters a good opportunity. And on this one, they're not contributing to population growth. They're just there on the landscape. They don't contribute to our buck to doe ratio. We don't even add them to that number, so they're just an additional hunting opportunity. We'd probably be a little bit more liberal on our season dates, especially where they're migrating through at that time of year. So,
And the region would help those people too, is to direct them where to go. I would hope.
yeah,
I'm sure they will.
yeah, and other hunters. People see them down there. Landowners see them. So.
Definitions are often tough. Management bucks, people looking through a spotting scope or a rifle scope. How difficult is it going to be to write a definition defining a cactus buck?
That's been one of the hang-ups in the past on having this discussion. One thing that we've talked about, and again, I didn't put the definition in here, but because we're still working through it and finalizing it, but one way you can get around this is to put in a rule that it would be a buck with velvet-covered antlers, and leave it that simple. Because if you see one of these bucks, and then you let the season dates determine when that cactus buck is, I don't think we'd have a cactus buck and hunt in August or September for that very reason. But if we're having these in late October and November, I think we can use a definition like that. And even if you had an animal that was typical framed and some of that and still had the velvet, the fact that they still have velvet in November probably is an indication that something's going on. And we may harvest some animals that are not your quintessential cactus bucks, but I think that's the simplest way to do it, to define this for hunters.
Bay elks? Goats?
The last one that are we okay to get, I may be out of order on this.
That's okay.
Okay. Last one that I want to address is have the division look at ending all antlerless public hunts by December 31st. This was a good, I really like this motion because it allowed for a lot of conversation as we met with the biologists and the managers to talk about the purpose of these late season cow elk hunts, what we're really trying to accomplish with our management strategies, and define this a little bit better. So I'll have quite a few slides on this. The purpose of cow elk hunts, the first and foremost, is to manage elk to their approved population objectives. We want to manage elk to their appropriate numbers. That's a goal that our biologists and our managers have, and we need cow elk hunts to do that. In addition to that, though, we also need to properly distribute elk on the landscape. I think that's equally as important in this day and age of elk management, in order to garner public support for having elk in the mountains. We also want to address rangeland concerns. We want to reduce depredation, which again can be very targeted and the cause of a lot of frustration from our friends in the agricultural community. And so we need this as a tool to do that. And at the root of it, provide hunting opportunities for sportsmen. Timing of elk hunts is vital to successfully managing elk populations and their distribution, and we'll show that here moving forward. So these are real data of radio-collared cow elk that we have on the Wasatch unit. That dark area in the middle of the summer right there is Strawberry Reservoir. So these are elk that are congregated on the summer range, and oftentimes they'll be up there August, September, October, November, and some years, depending on the year, they won't leave till early December in some cases, mid-December. And so what we have, though, is we get the question, why don't you do away with all January hunts and just harvest the elk that you need to on these summer ranges? In theory, that makes sense. They're all there. They're available in most cases. But what we have, and I want to highlight the struggles that we have as an agency sometimes, is if that's the summer range for the Wasatch unit, the bigger unit, what we have is come wintertime, these elk, they distribute to a lot of different winter ranges throughout the unit, down to Emma Park, Tabby Mountain, Diamond Fork, and Heber City, a lot of these different areas. And so if on winter range you have a depredation area, say by Heber City, and those elk that are in blue and purple, if you were just trying to harvest those animals in October, I'm not sure how you'd know if you got the right animals when they're up there on the Forest Service grounds up by Strawberry Reservoir. And so a lot of times what we need to do is wait for these animals to come down, and we'll have very targeted hunt dates and boundaries in order to address these issues that we have. And we acknowledge that there's disturbance associated with late season cow elk hunts. I mean, we're not trying to say that there's adding hunters and pushing elk in a lot of these cases doesn't occur, because it certainly does. But these late season hunts, they're really needed to reduce densities and the conflicts, whether those are competition with deer or agricultural conflicts. We need to be able to address the issues at the time they're occurring, because if you have several landowners that have haystacks and all these crops and the elk are coming down, it doesn't really matter if you reduce the elk herd by 200 on the unit, but you grew elk in that localized area. We need to give some relief to those landowners, and so that's why we need these hunts. Also, the late season hunts, they allow for more public harvest and reduces the need for DWR removals. A lot of times we're called on, immediately go remove these animals. They're only coming in at night. They're a real burden, and what they'll do a lot of times is they'll be on public land in the day, and they'll come down into the private lands at night, eat hay, and then go back. And so short of having a public hunt, we're the solution to provide relief to some of these landowners. So a year ago, we had our first private lands only permit hunts throughout the state. So we have 1 year of data on it. And I put this graph in here. On the x-axis, you have the month, and on the y, the percent of elk that were harvested by month. And so as you can see, late December, January, it accounted for about 75% of the take on elk. And what that means is these elk were, that's when the problems were occurring, when they were getting on that private land. So I get this as private lands permits, but the same issues occurring with public draw issues as well. So with that background, what the division can commit to is to remove or reduce late season hunts that are not fulfilling a management purpose. If we've had these types of hunts and they've solved the problem, or we've made really great progress, we can scale some of that back. But our plea with the board is we need some January hunts if we're going to manage elk appropriately on the landscape and solve some of these challenges. And that's all I have for this action item.
Well, I think that gives us a good overview as to the reason why we're doing that, Justin, because the public are the ones that brought this forward, especially the northern rack. They wanted to see that happen, but as you explained it, there are some areas where you can't harvest enough animals unless you go into those later. Because we did have a problem this past year up there. We had a shed hunt closure, but we still had an open cow hunt going on.
Correct.
People are out there, hunting cow elk when we had a closure on shed antler hunting. So,
and that there's some irony with that, because a lot of the calls I got, they said, we need to help these deer. We have way too many elk on top of deer. Well, if you don't harvest those elk, it only exacerbates it. So the next year you have more elk on top of those deer. If you have hunters go in and try to remove some of those elk, you're pushing deer. So we're dealing with two not very great solutions. There's downsides to both, and you can make those arguments. But when we call these hunts, we don't have biologists wake up and say, how can I disturb all the deer on the, I know what I'll do. I'll call this late hunt. But it's kind of a byproduct of trying to address some of the management challenges we have.
So it's not necessarily going to be an across the board December 31st, but it may be a mix and match. Some may close early, some you may want to go late.
Yeah,
depending on the area and what your goal is, what you want to accomplish management wise.
Correct. Yes. Yeah, and that's where the discussion was really good, and I'm glad we got the action log item, because instead of just getting in the old habit like, we had this hunt last year, let's do it again. It was really a good discussion to say, do you still need that hunt? Does it need to go till January 31st? Can it go to January 15th? Can it go to December 31st? And so it really, with elk, cow elk in particular, they're tricky. They adapt, and our hunting strategies need to adapt. We just hope that we can still retain this tool to harvest in January where needed.
Is it going to be confusing hunter-wise, where it's always been every late hunt is on the 30th or 31st of January? Is it going to be confusing? Some are going to be closing early, some are going to be late.
It may.
I guess if it says on your permit, hey, you're done on the 31st of December, and you can go till later. I guess it's basically buyer beware.
Yeah, and
pay attention to what's going on.
Correct, buyer beware, because we put those season dates on the permits before they apply, and so they know.
So they know ahead of time what their dates are.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think the public will like that. You get the information out to them and stuff like that, coming in. excuse me, coming up for the November, RAC and board meeting.
Yeah.
Just, I think that's a good evaluation you guys went through and stuff like that, Justin. And using more of a surgical approach is, it's
Okay.
always, anytime you can do that, I think that's the best way to manage. So.
Wait, one last thing, I didn't put in the PowerPoint, but sometimes I struggle to know what success looks like with a cow elk hunt, because we've had some where success rates are low, and people say, "That you sold me a camping trip, that's not good." And then we've had hunts where success rates were high, and they say, "Well, that was too much." And so I struggle sometimes to know what's the appropriate amount of harvest to have a successful cow elk hunt. And we hear it from both ends, and that's why I think it's got to go back to the purpose of the hunt. What's the management objective we're trying to accomplish? And sometimes it is increased harvest. And the private landowners that have elk in their haystack, they're going to appreciate that. And we'll have more public support for elk if we can address these issues. So.
Well, weather's a big factor in that too, as far as, when elk show up at certain places at certain times, so.
Yeah.
But we'll give you the tools to do whatever you need to do. If you need to go out and take some more, we have the availability to do that, so.
Well, thank you. And thanks for the opportunity to explain the why behind this, because there is a lot of misinformation on it. So. I'm going to turn the time over to Covey, and he'll take the next one, and then Rusty Robinson will take the two after that. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for the opportunity to address this. You asked us to evaluate what's going on in the state with shed antler hunting, and this was another one that was really good. We spent a lot of time and looked for a lot of input as to how people feel about this, and honestly, people are all over the board. More specifically, though, we wanted to take a review of what happened this last winter, where we had a severe winter, where we haven't several years, and some of the effects of that. So just as a recap, in 2017, the northern portion of Utah experienced a pretty severe winter. 4 units we fed deer in 4 units at nearly 100 locations, and here's what that looked like. So you see there, the northern portion of the state, the cache was hit really hard. On the cache, we monitor survival there, and on that unit, we did lose 90% of our fawns and 25% of our adults on that unit, even with feeding in our best efforts. Coming back, we knew that these populations were under additional stress, and so in late January, the director issued an emergency closure of the northernmost 11 most affected counties. Again, we heard from the southern portion of our state and the concerns there of, hey, if you guys close up here, everybody's going to come to southern Utah, and we really don't want that additional pressure on our herds. So we modified that in February 2nd, and went back out, and the entire state was closed to shed antler gathering until April 1st. And so some of the effects of that, just the immediate effects, were the enforcement. The year before, we spent 2,500 hours less enforcing shed antler gathering specifically. So we jumped up 2,500 hours, and law enforcement spent just shy of 4,000 hours just enforcing shed antler gathering, which resulted in about 125 citations. Another thing we didn't foresee is the effect that we'd have on the neighboring states. In Nevada, where there are no closures, in Lincoln County, there's some newspaper articles out there that talk about the negative impacts and the influx of shed antler gathering they felt, and some of their frustration with the closure. In Idaho, I know that some of their wildlife commissioners voiced concern to many of you on this board that, hey, when we do things like this, it affects Idaho, and there's some portions of Idaho where they're frustrated at the Utah license plate and the Utah license plates and the additional impact on their resource as well. Important thing to note here is that in Wyoming, where they do have some closures, Wyoming closes west of the divide, that there and on public land, that there they, even with those in place for years, they lost 100% of their fawns and 35% of their adults. So in our worst impacted areas, we lost 90%, and 25%. But with closures in Wyoming, the winter severity, it was just it was rough. And then Colorado, if we look there to see what they did, they closed the Gunnison Basin, so they're the extension of the Book Cliffs. But Colorado's considering a bigger closure that might go before their wildlife commission, and they're thinking about closing west of I-25 moving forward. They haven't done that, and that would be in the years to come, but they're considering that right now. So we took a step back and said, what are we really trying to accomplish? What do we want to do with a shed antler closure? And the two things we came back to is we want to protect mule deer populations and protect mule deer habitat, especially winter habitat. You know, it's not picking up a piece of bone that has the effect. It's the additional stress on the animal, being bumped or pushed or whatever we might say. And this graph here on the bottom is interesting. It's something we want to point out. So if you look at the right side, these are shed antler gatherers, the certificates, the course that we make people take, or that we have people take when they go out early to collect sheds. And those numbers have increased since 2012 from they've almost doubled. So we're looking at 10,000 people out there on the landscape in 2012 collecting sheds. And then as we approach 2017, we had over 19,000 individuals that took that course and were out there and excited to go pick up sheds. So if you look above, that's the deer population. We start out there at 320 and then go up through 2015. And it's important to note that 2016 was an average winter, not a severe winter, but an average winter. It was our first average winter in a lot of years. And the population took a tiny dip there. But I guess the take home from the graph is that in the presence of shed antler gathering, we grew a lot of deer. So with that on the landscape, the population was still growing. So in looking at this, and what do we really want to accomplish? What do we really want to accomplish? I mean, this is a great activity. This is an activity that yeah, there's a financial market for sheds, and we understand that, but also this is an activity that gets families out, gets kids interested in wildlife before they can even hunt. There are a lot of, I know individuals that have started, you know, they started shed hunting before they started hunting, and get excited about the possibility of finding that. I take my kids out. You know, moving forward, I think what we really want to do, and what we've talked about with WAFWA and the Mule Deer Working Group, is we want people to be able to participate in this activity, but we want them to do it ethically. You know, we want them to do it without adding that additional stress. You know, there are a lot of activities in the landscape right now. Utah's growing. It's not just the shed antler gatherers out there in the spring. You know, there's mountain biking, hiking, other types of recreation. And we're not looking to punish the guys that are out there enjoying wildlife. But with that in mind, during severe winters, I think you could see the division come to the board and ask for more strategic surgical closures on those affected areas, because we are concerned about mule deer, and we are concerned about those habitats, and we are concerned about that. So I guess the recommendation would be, moving forward, we would continue to allow shed antler gathering in combination with the ethics course. Again, knowing that if we hit another winter like 2017, we'll be back probably saying, hey guys, here's some affected areas, here's where we're going to feed. Could we surgically close some of these areas?
Questions?
Yeah, so the division, the officers were out in the field obviously much more because of the closure.
I don't know if more is the right word, Calvin. They were doing different activities. So
Okay.
So we have our officers out there.
I can say they're always out in the field, but maybe they were focusing more on
That activity
since we closed it, then they were out there looking more for that. Hence
Yes.
the 125 citations. Is that more? My guess is that's more than usual
It's more than we've issued in the past, yes.
because everything was closed. Was there reasoning as you visit with these individuals? I didn't know, or you know what, I knew and was going to take the chance anyway.
You know, I don't know. I wonder if somebody here from our law enforcement section could answer that.
I was just wondering if
that's a good question.
obviously people would had to have known that, hey, the whole season's closed.
Captain Jay Shirley with the Division of Law Enforcement section, but in response to a couple of your questions, I mean, we are out there in the field, but this was precipitated by people mostly calling us that once the closure happened, they would see something, and so our efforts switched
So I saw somebody out here. Would you come and check it
Yeah,
out?
so
And
then-
they were actually out there shed gathering.
And a lot of times, yes, they were. Sometimes it wasn't. I mean, that was part of the closure is we couldn't prohibit anybody from being out on the winter range. So
Right.
we had all kinds of activities going on. But once we put a closure in place, then everybody called us regardless of what that individual was doing, and we would respond and see what it was. The citations, they doubled. We had a little more than twice as many as we normally do. I mean, we have other laws in place that we use, but it more than doubled, and it was mostly an effort-based, was really public calling us, so.
So the majority of the public were concerned and basically did agree with it. Hey, you know what? Yeah, this is a good thing. Let's hold off. Let's not go out and harass the animals.
Agree might be a strong word
Yeah,
to use. I would say
okay.
what they wanted was their fair chance at those
Yeah.
sheds.
Okay.
And
All
if I
right. So
can't
maybe they
do
didn't
it-
agree with it, but hey, I want to punish so and so because he's out there trying to sneak a few early before I am, and I'm being a law-abiding citizen. So
Yeah, they wanted fair access
Sure.
to the same antlers.
Sure.
So, yep.
okay.
What effects do you anticipate if Colorado closes west of I-25 in Utah?
Yeah, that's a good question, Kevin. I assume that we'll see additional pressure. You know, I assume that we'll see Colorado license plates where they saw Utah license plates.
Do you have any idea? Is this a Utah thing or is it a everywhere thing?
Shed antler gathering?
Yeah, I mean, it just seems to have exploded here. Is it everywhere?
I think the answer to that is that there's an international market. There's a market for these things, and it's exploded across the West. They're valuable.
Yeah, all the other western states are experiencing the same thing we are as far as, shed antler gathering, how popular it's become and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
Another question, in talking through WAFWA, was there any discussion of if something was done of doing it together? The states.
You know, Justin was involved in those discussions. And Justin.
Yeah. So we had some of those conversations about how do we do this, but they're across the board as Kobe showed that list. I mean, you have closures all the way to nothing, and we're kind of right in the middle of that pendulum. And so, I know Nevada's tried some things, and their legislature said no, we're not going to allow a closure on some of this. So I think every state has their own pressures, and we put a fact sheet together on the mule deer shed antler hunting or gathering fact sheet, and the idea from that was we recognize that there's a lot of pressures on what state wildlife agencies can and can't do. So we advocated more for, if you're going to do it responsibly, and here's ways that you can do it without disturbing or harming the resource. And that's kind of where the Mule Deer Working Group landed. So.
What is the season date? What's the average season date for shed gathering? When does it start? When does it stop?
So we end the restriction, I guess, April.
Yeah,
April 15th.
April 1st. When can you technically start?
As soon as they fall off their head.
So it's any. I mean, there's no start date, but there is an end date.
Yeah, and I guess.
Oh, you have to have a permit.
So prior to April 15th.
Right.
Okay, so there's not necessarily a season date.
So kind of.
Explain that,
There's
Kobe.
an end date.
Yeah.
You have to have the antler gathering ethics course prior to April 15th.
Right. You have to go through that, which says do this, don't do that.
Yeah.
Okay, get that.
That starts February 1st.
Yeah. After that, you don't have to have it.
But during that window, you have
During
to
the window,
have-
you have to have the
Okay.
certificate.
Okay. No permit required or anything like that. Anybody can go out and find a shed.
Yeah,
But during that time period, you do have to go through and take that course and have proof that you've taken that course.
That's correct.
But after that, if I'm out moving cows and find a shed, it's fair game after that date.
Yes.
Okay.
So this was pretty public. Everybody, over 19,000 people who had the course. There's more that were concerned. How are we going to get that out to the public this year that there won't be the same restrictions?
I think we can put it on the website. We can do some things like that. But in addition to that, I think that maybe more importantly is we just need to continue to stress that if we're going to do this, let's do it ethically. I think we can get that out. We can get that information out on the website. But in order to say that we're not going to do it this year, we don't know what the winter looks like either. So does that make sense? Because if the winter, again, if we come into a severe winter, we may have closures in certain areas or recommend closures.
I guess just my concern is that this is obviously a very popular activity that people plan on. I've already had questions, many questions, people asking me, what are we going to do this year? What are you going to do this year for shed antler gathering? And so, you know, for the people that listen to this meeting, they'll be informed.
Sure.
Otherwise, I think there's got to be a way for us to take a very public thing and use it on so that there's no confusion.
We can work with our outreach section to get something out to the public on this.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. What we can do is there's 19,000 people that take that course. We can certainly put some information on that course. And yeah, we can certainly address it with those 19,000 people plus that are interested in doing that. We can get the word out to them.
Absolutely.
A little bit of education like you've done with us would maybe help too.
Okay.
Thank you.
I guess I've got one question. Those that are blatant, that you know, are pushing wildlife, really harming wildlife. Maybe they're tearing up roads, driving off roads, and they're repeat offenders. Is there any way to restrict them in the draw or anything that would do something to say, hey? Because right now there's really nothing that, you know, a $100 ticket or whatever it may be. It doesn't. Is there something that, from a wildlife standpoint, you know, if they were deemed at a certain amount that they couldn't put in for the limited entry the following year, something like that would. And I guess law enforcement and Marty, I don't know, but is there something like that would raise a red flag and they go, hey, I've got to be careful in this?
Yeah, that's probably a better question for Greg or Marty to answer. But.
Yeah, Greg Hansen, Utah Attorney General's office. If an individual was convicted of a Title 23 violation, they could qualify for big game suspension. In my experience, we haven't done that yet, but wildlife harassment violation would be eligible for big game suspension.
We didn't see a wildlife harassment violation, but we did see a trespass violation that we saw a hearing on the board that was centered around antler gathering, and that person did lose his hunting privileges from that.
That's a good point.
So I guess what he's saying is there is laws in place for that, and law enforcement would need to speak to that. But if they see that and they have that violation, they are at risk of losing.
Well, maybe that's part of the message that, you know, as we send out asking them to be careful, let them know that they are at risk of that. That if you know, hey, if you're not you know, obeying the laws, you could, you know, and I think they're aware of that. Maybe that would help all of us. So.
That's another thing we could add to the shed antler gathering ethics.
I agree. I think that would be a good part of that outreach, to let the public know that there are penalties attached to
Wildlife harassment.
wildlife. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So you've got the education part down. You're going to bring that forward to educate people about shed hunting in the future, right?
We'll work on that.
Okay. Any other questions for Covey? Thanks.
Okay. Thank you.
Rusty Robinson, I'm the statewide bighorn sheep and mountain goat biologist, and I'll be presenting on the next two action log items regarding mountain goats. The board asked us to address a couple of these. The first one in regards to the Deep Creek Mountains. The motion reads, I move that we add to the action log a request for the division to review placing mountain goats on the Deep Creeks and to have a recommendation ready by this fall. So a little bit of background with this. What we've done is we formed a Deep Creek Ungulate Restoration Committee, and that consisted of representatives from the DWR, the wool growers, the BLM, local grazing permittees, county commissioners from Juab and Tooele counties, the Goshute Tribe, Utah Foundation for North American Wild Sheep, Sportsmen for Fish and Wildlife, Wild Utah Project, and Sportsmen at Large. The committee considered the options of transplanting bighorn sheep to the Deep Creeks, mountain goats, neither or both. Committee met 4 times between January of 2016 and June of 2017, and there was support from the committee to transplant mountain goats. So from there, the committee wrote a draft unit management plan regarding mountain goats on the Deep Creeks. And basically where we're at in the process moving forward is we're continuing to work with stakeholders. We've scheduled a field trip for this fall to go look at some of the habitat, bring some interested parties there to take a look at that. We're currently gathering and compiling vegetation data in those alpine plant communities. We plan to hold public open houses in surrounding communities to gather more input to go into that unit plan. So where we're at in the process is we're currently compiling all that data from stakeholders and from vegetation. We plan on refining the plan further, and we will report to the board with options prior to anything happening there. So, any questions on that one?
When's your field trip? You got that planned yet?
Have we got a firm date on that, Covey? Or would you like to be in the loop on that?
Sure.
Joe? Okay. We'll let you know.
Yeah, thank you.
Anything else?
Everybody good? Okay.
The next action log item we're asked to address reads, I move that we add to the action log a request to have the division investigate potential transplant sites for mountain goats, including the possibility of the Manti, the Pavant, Cache Logan, and North Farmington Peak, and to bring a recommendation back to the board, including a map of historical ranges and a timeline for transplants. So this was, I appreciate this action log item. This helped us beef up our statewide model, and it was a really good exercise to look at some of this. What we did is we met with our regional managers and biologists to evaluate some of these areas with regards to mountain goat transplants. So we specifically looked at the 4 areas the board mentioned, the Manti, the Pavant, Farmington Peak, and Cache Logan. And we also looked at the Deep Creeks and the Stansbury Mountains. We applied the habitat model to those areas. In thinking about these areas, obviously we consider social issues, ability for populations to establish on their own, and habitat availability. And then what came out of that is we created a list of potential transplant areas and also a list of areas where we would like to let goats establish naturally on their own. So the first area the board asked us to look at, the Fillmore Pavant, this is a look at that habitat model we've applied to the mountain, And what this model does, it's a model that's been used in Colorado, and it considers slope, elevation, and distance to escape terrain to define, what a mountain goat would theoretically use. And this model, the orange is habitat that's available above 9,000 feet, and the red color is habitat above 10,000 feet. So there's definitely some habitat there. As we looked a little closer and we applied tree cover to that model, a lot of that habitat gets swallowed up by tree cover, which obviously mountain goats like to avoid. There's no doubt there's still habitat there. This is an area where we've been seeing goats for the past few years, and we'd be inclined to let them kind of tell us where the habitat is, let them establish a little bit, and potentially augment in the future. But this would be on the let them establish naturally list. The next area that frankly kind of surprised us how well it modeled is the Central Mountains manti. And just for reference, the top of that big red line to the bottom is roughly 36 miles, and that's habitat above 10,000 feet, and the orange again is habitat above 9,000 feet. So this is a unit that modeled really well, and we would definitely put this on our potential transplant list. The next one is Farmington Peak, and just due to latitude and just the elevational structure of the mountain, we dropped the model down to 8,000 feet. So the yellow is habitat above 8,000, and the orange is habitat above 9,000. Again, this is another one where if we look at tree cover, it swallows up a lot of that habitat. There's still a lot there, specifically around Thurston Peak and Farmington Peak and off that east side. And this is another area where we're seeing goats show up in these areas. And so we would add this to the, let them establish naturally list and potentially look at augmenting that in the future. The next area the board has to look at is Cache Logan. And again, this modeled really well. We dropped it down to 8,000 again with the yellow and orange habitat above 9,000, and that modeled really well. So this is an area we've also seen goats taking up shop on their own, and so this would technically be an augmentation, but we would definitely add it to our prioritized transplant list. Again, the Deep Creeks models really well, and the Stansbury Mountains model pretty well. So in summary, we've got our potential transplant areas list. That consists of the Deep Creek Mountains, the Cache Logan area, the Central Mountains manti, and the Stansbury Mountains. And just as a side note, some of these areas may require changes to the statewide plan before that happens. And then the areas where we'd like to let goats establish naturally, similar to what we did on the Nebo and the Dutton, where goats started showing up on their own. We kind of waited till they told us where they wanted to be, and then we augmented them. We can take that approach with these other areas, and that's Ogden, Farmington Peak, and Fillmore, Provence. So timeline moving forward, we've reached out to Washington and Wyoming, both of which may have excess mountain goats in the next couple of years, but they've got to work through their processes to make those goats available. And also, just as a side note, there may be some augmentations in the statewide plan that may take precedent over new introductions, and that would be the Dutton, Uintas East, Loafer Mountain, et cetera. There's several in there, but just wanted to mention that. Thank you. Is there any questions on that one?
Yeah, I have a question. Some of these areas, do all these areas have goats now? Are they naturally there, or are they?
No, some of the ones
some places they are, some places they aren't.
Right. So areas like the Provence, there's been some goats showing up, presumably from the beaver unit.
And they will migrate
back and forth. Yeah,
back and forth.
Same with Farmington Peak and Cache Logan. Some of the other ones, the Deep Creeks and Stansbury's, Manti, don't currently have goats. We have seen a goat show up on the Manti.
Have seen one occasionally, but not really getting established yet. But the habitat's there.
Correct.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Okay.
Thanks, Rusty.
Thank you.
Well, congratulations, Byron. You've officially had the longest run of old business and action log ever.
We need to thank John Bear, the former chair, for that.
Putting all that together for us.
I'd thank him, but he's out coyote hunting, I'm sure. All right, with that, let's move on and have a DWR update by Director Fowlks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We don't have a whole lot of new stuff we need to cover because it's been such a short period of time since our last meeting, but there are a few things I did want to touch on. We were fortunate enough to be the host for the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies annual meeting at Snowbird mid-September. I wanted to put out a specific thanks to Staci Coons and Woodward for their work on planning that. They did an amazing job, and it went off very successfully. I also wanted to thank Mike Christensen and Paul Gedge in the back for working on the AV up there. And welcome Paul to DNR. He's now a DNR employee. We'll be doing this full time. So thanks to you two for doing a great job with the AV stuff up there as well. It turned out really well. Utah was well represented, and we look good. So part of the association meetings, I mentioned last time that we were filing an amicus brief with that appeal to the 10th Circuit Court on the LaSalle goat issue. Marty and I were able to present to the executive committee at OFWA, and they voted to also file an amicus brief on behalf of all the member agencies of OFWA. So we have good support there on that. The previous 2 days before this meeting, I was on the Natural Resource Coordinating Council meetings tour, actually. We went down and toured the Bryan Head Fire. It was really interesting to see the damage first that the fire caused, but also the rehabilitation efforts that are going on currently. We were able to see the 1-ton bail bombs as they were dropping them on those critical areas. My particular interest there was I'm really concerned about our aquatics resources up there. We've lost those streams going into Panguitch Reservoir already, and we're concerned about Panguitch Reservoir itself. So it was good to see that there's some remediation efforts going on there that should help. So just by way of advance notice for migratory birds, waterfowl, Blair Stringham represents our agency on the technical committee for the Pacific Flyway. I represent the state for the council, for the Pacific Flyway Council. I'm also the representative for the Pacific Flyway on the Service Regulation Committee and the National Flyway Council. So we have some things coming up with regard to that. One of them is Blair has asked for an extension on Sandhill Crane season dates, particularly to address the later seasons occupations of sandhills out in the basin. We're looking for a 90-day season. We may end up with a 60-day season, which is way better than the 30-day season we have now. So that's on the agenda to be addressed at the October meetings that I'll be attending for the Service Regulation Committee. We're also looking at enhancing and increasing some opportunities with tundra swans. Since trumpeter swan populations have reached objective, we're looking to liberalize some of the tundra swan regulations. So that's coming down the pike as well.
So just a question while you're on that. The sandhill crane, I notice in other states, are hunted for an extended period of time and without a draw system. They just have. But I thought our draw system and our extended was federally regulated. So how are they able to do that and we not?
That's a great question. Those liberal hunting seasons occur in the Central Flyway. We hunt the Rocky Mountain distinct population, and it has different regulations according to the Pacific Flyway. So we're looking to liberalize that as much as we can to address those concerns in the basin, but that's the reason why you see those differing seasons. There are far more sandhill cranes in the central region than there are in the Rocky Mountain population. One other thing I need to mention, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but Justin Shannon is our new wildlife chief on a career mobility, filling in behind Bill Bates. So we welcome him in that new role. And going along with that, Covey Jones is our new big game coordinator. So we welcome him into that role as well. So hunting season's in full swing. Fishing's excellent. I got on a strawberry on Monday. We had an amazing time. Caught lots and lots of cutthroat, a couple rainbow. Fishing's good, hunting's good. So get out there and enjoy that. One quick thing I'll mention, and it's on an action item. and that is there was a lot of debate on the trapping issue, the Furbearer issue that came before you last board meeting, so we have an action item that's going to try to address some of the concerns that came up with that. So that's all I've got.
Thank you very much, Director. Any questions? Okay, let's move on to action item number 5, Conservation Permit Annual Report. Justin Shannon, our Wildlife Chief.
Okay, thank you. Today I'm going to present on the Conservation Permit Program report for 2017. So a little bit of background and overview. This is a program that started in the 1980s with bighorn sheep. It was a means to create revenue and do some really good things for that species, and very successful, and as a result it has expanded into all the big game species, including cougars, bears, and turkeys as well. The program is regulated by R657-41, which limits the conservation permits to approximately about 5% of the total permits. And since 2001, the program has generated more than $44.9 million, so just shy of $45 million for wildlife and their habitats. And some great conservation works occurred as a result.
Justin, just before you, sorry, I'm interrupting you there because I found it very interesting in your report that you sent out to us that those same exact permits over that same period of time would have generated about $50,000.
Yes.
Otherwise.
Yeah, had they not been.
So from 50,000 to 45 million different.
No, I'm sorry. So it was 50,000 in 1 year is what it would have been.
1 year. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
But we generated about $4.1 million, so that's probably the more accurate comparison for FY17. Yeah.
Plus the multipliers that, yeah.
Yeah. So if you look at the number of conservation permits issued in Utah from 2001 to 2017, from 2001 to about 2006, it climbed pretty steadily to just shy of 400 permits, about 380 or 390 or so. But since then, it's gradually been declining. The last 5 or 6 years, we've been fairly stable, slight decreases, where we're just over 300, 314 to be exact for this past year. The participating conservation organizations are the Mule Deer Foundation, National Wild Turkey Federation, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, Safari Club International, Sportsmen for Fish and Wildlife, Utah Bowmen for Habitat, or Utah Bowmen's Association, as they're known as well, and the Utah Foundation for North American Wild Sheep. And I just want to highlight these have been really great partners to work with. They're passionate, and they really care about the resource, and they've been exceptional partners and great to work with. If you look at the conservation permit funds raised in Utah from 1980 to 2017, again, just from 2001 on, where we were generating just shy of $1 million, to the last several years, where 2 of the past 3 we've generated over $4 million. There's been a lot of growth and a lot of success with this conservation permit program, and like I said earlier, this last year we generated about $4.1 million in excess of that. Some of the accomplishments for 2017, just shy of $2 million, or just over $1.9 million was spent on approved projects, and we were able to capture and handle 1,349 big game animals in FY17. More specifically, it was about 77 bighorn sheep, and a lot of this was for to build disease profiles so we can manage the species better and more appropriately, as well as document movements. 109 moose for some research that we've been doing and monitoring efforts, which has been great. 18 bison in the Book Cliffs, 250 elk, a lot of that on the Wasatch unit, and 895 deer, mostly for monitoring survival rates, body condition scores, a lot of that information that we used this past winter to gauge the severity of it and answer those questions is what impact is this going to have on our deer. A lot of that was based on the data that was collected for deer. So a lot of moving parts, and this is a very aggressive capture schedule. It really dominates a lot of the time of our biologists and many of our volunteers. And the one thing I want to highlight with this is this past year being out on some of these projects, it was really kind of neat to see sportsmen be able to handle deer and other animals for sometimes the first time in their life to handle a live animal, and more so than the monitoring and all the data that were collected, which is really good. It was a great opportunity to interact with our public and our stakeholders and talk to them about what we're doing for wildlife management, for wildlife conservation. And you know, a couple of years ago we had a big pronghorn capture, and Calvin, I think you were there. It's just a great experience to be able to talk about. I mean, it's just great to interact with the resource. We're all so passionate. We care so much about it. And these permits, the funds generated from these permits allow us to do some really aggressive work and conservation, which is exceptional. Habitat work. This is a big part of what we do. It's a big part of our identity as a wildlife agency, and the sole purpose is to make sure that we're managing for healthy wildlife and healthy habitats. Our director mentioned it earlier with the Bryan Head fire. You know, with these types of permits and in the report that was given, one of the advantages is you have funds available, and so you can quickly mobilize and deal with some of the issues that we face. And natural disasters, you know, not just in Utah, but throughout the United States are occurring, and we're fortunate enough to be able to have a funding source to quickly mobilize and make lemonade, if you will, trying to do what we can to help the streams and the wildlife habitat and those types of things, stabilize soils and get some plants growing. Guzzlers, a lot of the guzzlers that we put in for wildlife are funded through the Conservation Permit Program, and then many, I mean countless, there's a lot of, not countless, that's an exaggeration because you can certainly count them, but it's a lot of projects that we've done for deer and elk, aspen projects, lop and scatters, juniper removal, those things. So moving forward, one thing that we're really excited about, and the conservation permit has already helped with quite a bit, is our migration initiative. And this is where we want to track movements of wildlife on the landscape, and just some big picture ones that we have is studies, or not studies, but monitoring efforts that we have moving forward are deer and cougars on the Paunsaugunt. A lot of interest on that unit, as we've talked about earlier. Book Cliffs, looking more at deer and bison and cougars and bears and that unique system over there. Northern Utah elk, we've done a lot on the Wasatch. We want to move some of that up to Logan and surrounding areas. Parker Mountain pronghorn, always a lot of questions on that unit, and we can be able to look at where those animals are going, what resources they're using, and working with USU on some cougar and bear monitoring throughout the state. And for FY18, we're excited. I mean, there's already been $1.55 million committed for these projects, and we're really excited about that. And that's really all I have for the Conservation Permit Report update. So thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Questions for Justin from the board?
Justin, I asked this question at the last meeting on Expo. Is there a document? Basically, I see this as a grant program. Instead of giving cash, we give tags. There's a way to generate that into money. Every grant that I've dealt with, at some point I have to have a zero page, whether that's 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, where it rolls. Is there a document that I can look at that says, okay, in 2012, all of that money was done this and all these great things happened, and 13 and then 14, 15 might not be completed, 16 probably not, 17. Is there that zero page in this program?
That's a good question. I mean, I know we've got the audits. I'm fairly new to the program, so maybe someone can answer that better than I can.
I think that's what Kenny's going to do next.
Is that what's coming? Is that what's coming next?
Yeah, okay. But there is the audit and the report, and they complement each other very well to explain how these dollars are being spent and to account for that. And we take that task seriously in documenting where this money's going.
Perfect. I may be jumping the gun. And then the other question I've gotten is that 5%. We're counting turkeys and elk in that number to get to our 5%. So if those two were dropped out, would we have to cut other tags to maintain in that 5%?
Yeah, it's per species, and there's more to it than that. This is just an overview, but there's a cap on how many conservation permits you can give for a unit. You can't go above 8, and so with the conservation permit rule, it's right around that 5% is what we're aiming for.
Justin, what would you do without that money?
We're
going to do 1,350 animal movements, would you?
No, we'd be a lot more limited in what we could monitor as far as wildlife survival and movements and some of that stuff. Would be limited in some of the research that we could conduct. And that's really important. I think a lot of times research gets a negative connotation associated with it, but for us, we try to use these dollars for research that's management oriented, where we say, okay, we need to manage better. We recognize we have deficiencies. What information do we need in order to make better management decisions? And we use these funds there. So I think it's really advanced a lot of our programs in the section, a big game section in particular, and cougars and bears, we're looking to learn more. But and also the habitat. You know, we couldn't be as responsive to some of these fires. We couldn't obtain some of the match that we get from the conservation permit programs as easily. In short, we'd just be more limited in what we could do.
So they are very important.
I feel so, yes.
Program.
Absolutely.
That giant bonus he got last year wouldn't be possible without conservation.
Yeah. I'm 100-air now, so I'm really excited about that. So,
okay.
Yeah, hundreds of dollars. It's incredible.
Any other additional questions from the board? Any questions from the audience? We appreciate the conservation groups that are here. Obviously, this is a big concern for you, and appreciate your attendance.
Thank you. Troy Justinson, Sportsman Fish and Wildlife. Justin, that number, $44 million, did that represent what was raised or the match that you get on that?
Oh, that's just the money that was raised, and so, yeah, it has nothing to do with the matches.
Give me a ballpark of what that leverage to.
Times 3.
That's going to be, well, that might be tough to give, but in theory, you could take $1 from the conservation permit program, and if you use a PR match, you add $3 to it. I'm not sure if that's always happened from 2017 to
perfect timing
the
for the applause.
You're welcome. So I don't know.
Would it be safe to say you're pushing $200 million?
Yeah, but in addition to that, there's other matches
sure.
that are more difficult to get into. But yeah, I mean that money serves as a base to really get momentum for a lot of these great management efforts.
Then how many sheep tags do we have in the state currently for desert and Rocky Mountain Bighorn?
We're probably going to be close to 90, right around maybe 85 to 90 public draw permits, right in that neighborhood.
Without this program, would we have that number of sheep tags here today?
I don't believe so, because for us these we needed money initially, like in the 1980s, as we were doing a lot of our sheep management. It helped start a lot of these populations and later bolster a lot of these populations. So we're reaping the benefits now, but a lot of that was because of the groundwork that was laid decades ago to do this type of stuff, and the conservation permit program was a big part of that.
Thank you. Congratulations on your new job.
Thanks.
Lee Howard, representing myself today. I noticed the 895 deer, is that mostly taken out of the cities?
Some of that is. I think it's just shy of 300 that were taken out of the cities. If memory serves, I think it's 295. The others were to go out and capture fawns and adults and do some of that type of work.
How is this program working? When I was on the board, there wasn't a program like this, and it seems like a very good program. Is it successful?
The urban deer program, or which program in particular?
Yeah, the deer program.
Well, we're addressing some challenges. You know, we're trying to make progress in some of these areas that we've had a lot of conflict in and not a lot of solutions. And I would say progress has been made. Yeah.
The other thing, Troy mentioned the wild sheep. And when we started our Wild Sheep Foundation in 1991, we had like 90 sheep in the state. And through FNAW's aggressive having the money to go get transplants from all the different states that were available, I think that was the successful part of our sheep program, is having this conservation money to do it. And I'm just so grateful for the conservation program and people like Shannon that stepped forward and helped us all the way. Thank you.
Thanks, Lee.
Thank you, Lee. Any further questions?
I could add a little more to that too, with how successful this program's been. I'm been around a long time. I put in for sheep for 27 years, back when we had 3 or 4 or 5 permits available. Disappointed every year. And then we started this program, and it took me 14 years, and I hunted desert bighorn sheep. And I'm just one of many, many, many that's reaped those benefits. And people need to look at what opportunity that gave us. All that money gave us a lot more opportunity to hunt not only sheep, but elk, deer, goats, everything. So anyway, great program. Thanks.
Thank you. I don't have any comment cards. Is that correct? That hasn't been overlooked over there on your table, has it? It's a giant audience. I was just making sure. And I'll summarize the RAC motions. They were all in favor of this. So, board discussion. Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion. Okay, Donnie has made a motion to accept as presented. I have a second. Oh, 2 of them over there. I saw Kevin first. Let's give it to Kevin.
Oh, I guess the question is, are we accepting permits or are we accepting the report?
Just an annual report. Yep. Okay, I've got a motion and a second. All in favor? Unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, Justin. Appreciate that. With that, number 6, conservation permit audit by Kenny Johnson. The only audit I look forward to.
Yeah, it's not everybody's favorite word, for
No.
sure.
No.
And so, Kenny
I
Johnson.
had nightmares again after reading your audit about other audits. So,
It's a common thing at my house, too. Kenny Johnson, the Admin Services Chief here in Salt Lake. So appreciate it, Mr. Chairman and board members. Long time no see. Been a month now, I think. So we have completed our conservation permit audit for 2017. I wanted to thank the staff internally that helps us with this. They're good accountants, and they pester the groups, and I appreciate the help that the groups give us to present this information and pull it off. They're great to work with, and we appreciate them tolerating our presence during these audits. So Justin's kind of covered my first slide or 2 here, the program overview. This is all fairly common knowledge. Small percentage of permits awarded to the conservation partners that we have. These permits bring in critical revenue for wildlife and habitat that we've kind of just talked about a little bit. And then I think even in addition, and possibly even bigger to that, is these groups provide a lot of boots on the ground to get stuff done. The dollars are one thing, but you got to have the people with shovels and everything else to take care of business out there on the ground. And so that's huge for us. This year there were 314 permits awarded to our partners. These permits are marketed and auctioned off to maximize the return and get the most value that we can out of them. The revenue, the way this works is it's returned to the division for approved projects, 30% directly paid back to the division, 60% retained by the group, and then those funds have to be used on division approved projects, and then the groups get to keep 10% for some of their administrative overhead and costs. The audit really ensures 3 things essentially: that the expenditures were pre-approved before the work started on the ground, that the funds were kept separate in federally insured bank accounts, and that the prices reported at a banquet match what we end up getting at the end of the year when we run through the audit. And so that's the primary focus of what we look at. This year, a couple little things we'll talk about. 100% compliance with project approval. There were no issues there. With 2 small exceptions, the groups complied with verifying that the funds were kept separate and in secure bank accounts, and we'll talk a little bit more about those on the next slide. 103 permits were selected to compare at the auctions with what price came in later. So this is our people going to sit in and participate at the banquets and record what the prices were versus what comes back in. And we spot check some of those, and so about a third of them or so this year, and they were in 100% compliance as usual there.
I saw one actually gave us a little more than what they sold it for, but that was fixed.
Yes. Yep. That happens on occasion, but usually not. Usually it's pretty
fixing it.
And then depends on how much attention I'm paying if I'm sitting at a banquet or whoever happened to be there that night. So, but yeah, 100% compliance this year. A couple things specifically. So SCI remitted the 30% late, but it has been received here at the division. And again, you know, the process is solid and sound. Anytime you introduce people, there's always some things that can come up, and so in some of these, it's just, you know, errors that humans make or needs that we had, and so in this case, SCI was a little bit late with that, but also their bank statements, and there was a vacation in there that kind of slowed us down in completing that part of the audit, and so the point of this one is we'll work with SCI to make sure we can complete their balance, but everything we were provided, I guess, checked out well. So we're just we'll work through them. A couple more bank statements we'll know for sure, but we just wanted to report that we did have a little bit of an issue there, but we are in the process of fixing that one.
Has that ever happened before?
Not in recent history that I know of. And it could be a day or two here or there, but for the most part, that September 1 deadline is met, and they take it serious. And
has that September 1 deadline ever changed in this process?
No, not since I've been here. I think that's always been the target.
That's established by rule, Kenny?
Yeah.
So if they're not compliant with the rule, then what recourse is there?
I think first we look at the situation and see what it is, and then we try to remedy it and fix it. It could be, you know, if it was really egregious and came right down to it, we may have to have you guys look at possibly not awarding them permits. So that's probably the ultimate outcome in a really egregious situation. But this was, you know, just some mistimings on vacations and new people helping and those kinds of things. And so.
Well, this is a very important program, and it's under a lot of scrutiny, that especially the last couple of years. And I just want to make sure that, you know, SCI has obviously done a good job in the past, is what you're saying. And I know they have, just from the reports and stuff like that. But yeah, when there's a breakdown or something like that, we just need to put some teeth into that to make sure that they're aware, because this is a very important program. It doesn't only affect that individual conservation group, but it puts a shadow on everybody else in the program, especially on the next one you get down to it. So.
Yeah, and that's fair to say, Byron. So we do take it serious, and again, it kind of depends on situation. If they're in contact with us, we know things are happening, then we can deal with it. If somebody just disappeared and we hadn't heard from them for weeks and weeks and weeks and months, we'd really definitely want to do something a little more drastic. But in this case, it was a week and a half or so late, something like that, and so we worked with them to make sure they're on board and on the same page with us again for next year's audit.
They have a new person, and that new person is the one you're working with now.
I think they had one former treasurer that was helping out in the past, and there was a transition there, and so I know, you know, they're busy doing everything else too, but we try to make sure we reiterate that this is an important focus, and that those deadlines are something we need to hit every year. So I think we're in a good spot with them now. We're on the same page again. That fourth bullet down, is that the one you're referring to, Byron?
Yes.
So RMEF remitted the 30% direct to the division out of a different account, an account not conservation permit money, which you know, when they're working in those different accounts can happen. The point here is we can still identify the identity of those funds, so they'll just need to remove those from from the conservation account to balance that out, and I believe that's already been taken care of. So it happened. We identified it, and I think moving forward, it's resolved. I would consider it resolved. And then that last bullet is kind of just some cleanup stuff that we see. Small amounts of interest when you've got different accounts and projects and checks going in and out of them. You get bank fees and interest, and so each year there's a little bit of that, a few $100 to just a few dollars in interest and some of the bank fees that should be transferred out by that September 1st deadline as well. We always see this one, and I think the groups are pretty good about it. It's just the timing of when we do the audit sometimes can not make everything manifest on that bank statement in these little, couple dollars worth of interest that we're talking about here. So that one's pretty common, and the group's really good about it. And our people monitor that and try to help make sure those transfers happen before the audit is complete.
And did all the checks clear the bank so far?
I believe so. Yeah, when we sent out the packet, they hadn't, but by now I would assume they all have for sure.
There again, that's another deadline that they're supposed to be money in-house in DWR's account.
Well, they have to remit it, so we need the check certainly by the date.
We need to define that then, because if there's some kind of a misunderstanding there, they wait till the end of the month to send it in. It's not going to clear, by the 1st. Yeah,
we could clarify that, but I think in most instances it's here well in advance, and there aren't any issues there as long as we get the check and can watch it. I think that's fine for us.
It's kind of like the proverbial, checks in the mail.
Yeah.
Got a lot of that, over the years and stuff. So
usually the guy saying that though doesn't have any money in his account.
Yeah.
I guess, Kenny, I was just a little concerned because of all the times that I've looked at these audits. This one just seemed a little more messy than previously, and so I guess I echo what Byron says. I think we really need to reiterate the importance of these deadlines so that when we receive this audit, it's clean and there's no room for, well, I don't mind public scrutiny, but as they scrutinize it, there's no room for misconceptions of where those funds are or what they might be used for. And if the audit is clean and neat like it has been, I was just a little concerned this time. It just wasn't quite as neat as it's been before.
Yeah, and we agree. So you'll see in the recommendations we're kind of the strategy moving forward. But yeah, we agree. The cleaner the audit is, obviously the better. But at the same time, we've got to report the little things that we see so we can make it a kind of a continual improvement process for everybody. And like I say, the groups are great. Our staff's pretty solidified now. We've kind of transitioned a few different accountants over the audit, and so that's pretty solid right now. So I think moving forward, I think you're exactly right, and we will reiterate and train and do everything we need to make sure these little things that we're seeing now come back clean in future audits for sure. So we just wanted to make sure we reported openly to everyone what we actually found. So I think that's part of the process. Yeah.
Can I add a little bit to that? I think we've got a unique conservation story to tell here. We have a lot more of these tags than anybody else. There's all these amazing things happening, but I'm not sure we are as clean as we should be, because on the back end of this, we've got $2 million remaining for other projects. Now, there's going to be a tremendous amount of good things done with that, but I suspect some of that money is probably 16 money that didn't get billed, and some of it may be 15 money, and some is 17 money. And at least I haven't found a document that says, okay, in 14 we've used all of 2014 money. This is all of the amazing things, and they are all outstanding things. It's a story that I think we are unique in telling, and history will tell whether we're right or wrong. But getting to a zero of all of 14 was used, all of 15 was used, and we still keep this because there are those times when we have a fire and we want to do something. Zion's report we had there, we want money to do that. We need to keep that reserve over there, but at some point all of those 14 or 15 or 16, whatever we decide, we need a report that says we gave these tags, we made this money, look at what was done with it, and it is, I think in the history is going to say we're right, but at least I'm not seeing a document where we get to zero, and it may take a couple years to get that. But that remaining part there, that $2 million pot, that we just keep, we do great things with it, and then we refill it. It never goes empty, and we never get to a zero. And that's, I don't want people to think I'm upset with this, but in the name of transparency, at some point, all of that year gets to zero. And I'd love to be able to say, look what we did with that money. And right now, I don't think we can. So
I think that your point's well taken, and we really don't account for it in that way on the ground. There's lots of variables each year with those funds, and so the audit's always a rolling snapshot of money by group essentially, and so we do watch the balances over time. But yeah, I think
there is. I mean, maybe there is a report. Is there a report that says in 2014 we gave however many tags, it generated this much money, and we did all of these things with it, and there's a zero at the bottom of the table?
What we do try to publish is in the appendix to the one Justin just presented. There's the annual project report, and so that covers a lot of the specific year-to-year money actually spent on the ground, and the audit essentially just looks at the money collected, and then the assumption in all of it is money first in is money first spent. And so that's why we're able to do it on a rolling, year-to-year basis. And so yeah, I think projects get us close. I think that report would help to get you a little bit closer. And then we just have to consider if we wanted to look, deeper into closing out a fiscal year, or if we just say, nope, they've met their obligation to the rule, and I think that's what we're doing now.
Every federal grant that I've used at my real job, at some point I have to give them a report that says zero, and I would love to see that report, but I'm one person on this. But
Ken, Mike's right behind you. He might have something to add to help Carl.
I'm Mike Canning. I'm an assistant director here with the division. And Kenny's correct. The conservation permit rule, the way it's currently written, does not ask us to kind of track the money year by year, or ask the groups to track the money year by year. So we have tracked it by group. And you're right, we don't have a zero balance each year, but we ensure that the funds are spent or committed within, they have a little over 2 years to spend or commit those funds. And so we track that every year, make sure that's happening. We have a list of all the projects where we actually spent money in the appendix of the annual report that you have in your packet today. And then we also have a list in Kenny's audit of, I believe it's in there, if not, we have it in our database, of all the projects where they've committed funds for the next year. And so we've got that, and it's difficult to track year by year because we'll say FY17 as an example. The groups will give us funds for projects. Many of those projects will get completed in 17. Some of them will get canceled. Some of them will get partially completed. And so then we go into 18, and we may finish some projects. On the canceled projects, we'll have them reallocate those funds. They don't have an audit finding because they committed them years ago, but they may have to reallocate them to a new project. Maybe that project gets canceled 2 years from now, so we have to reallocate them again. And so we're tracking all the funds to make sure that they're all spent appropriately, they're all committed or spent within the time frames that are required. But we're not tracking to see, are all the 16 funds gone by 19? If that's what you're asking, we could change our accounting system and change the rule, but we haven't done that in the past.
And all of what you just explained kind of adds some of the smoke to this, and I would love to take that smoke away, because I think we're, and once again, I'm one person on this board, and I'm not saying it's easy, because I've dealt with federal grants for 30 years just doing exactly what you did, or just explained better than I'm doing. But just the melting pot of always having money going in and always coming out, and we never get a report that says, look, in 14 or 15, whatever, I mean, even if it's longer than that it never got to a zero and they were all used. When people are looking and saying, yes, it was allocated, canceled, reallocated, canceled, reallocated, well, I'd love to see that report that said that at least put 3 years back a zero. And I think we take all of the mystique away from this project and let people just focus on all the good things.
Yep.
Rather than the melting pot of $2 million going here, and I think we take away some of the argument against this program.
If that's something the board would like us to do, we couldn't go back in the past and do that, but we could start that going forward, trying to track each organization's money by year throughout time. That would be much more complicated, but we could do that.
Appropriate, I'll make that motion, and we'll see what happens. All right. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, and I think I think to reiterate what Mike said, it's the commitment to commit the funds and spend them. Spend's pretty easy. We have all the documentation for that. Commit's pretty easy because we have the project cover sheets, but it does give some flexibility to projects that lapse and get canceled and all of that. So those are all good points. So recommendations at the end of the day, again, we've reiterated with the group specifically, and we'll do so again with all of them. We plan to have a training again and bring everybody in, make sure we're all on the same page. But they've got to remit that 30% to the division by the September 1 deadline. Get us all the bank detail that we need to complete the audit, at the same time. It's the same deadline. Group should transfer the 10% admin costs and any of the account interests out of the account by that same September 1st deadline. And then we're committed to making sure we reiterate this again and hold some trainings if we need to individually again. And then this is just the 2017 snapshot of the revenue. I never know how much time to spend on this. I think you've probably seen the table in the packet. This is the groups, obviously down the left-hand side, the total number of funds available this year, carried over from last year, carried over from the requirement of 15, and then everything spent, and then the required balance that they needed to show us in the audit, and then the funds that are committed or billed in FY18, and then the balance that remains for future projects. And I think the point here is, and kind of back to Carl's point, it's a revolving process each year. It's where are we this year? It's that first money in is the first money spent. And this kind of shows that we're chipping away at those balances and have them in reserves for future projects. And so that's really all I have.
Well, I think, Kenny, going back to Carl's question, this helps to illustrate that, that money is used eventually, but it's not, in detail like Carl was talking about to get to where it actually shows. But it is all accounted for at the end, Yeah. So there is no loss of funds and stuff like that.
Right.
And what's not committed actually ends up going back to you, and you put it into other projects and stuff like that.
Yep, correct.
The other questions from the board? Questions from the public? Okay, let's a board discussion here on what we've discussed and then what we need going forward.
Like I mentioned earlier, that we have a rule in place, and we had two groups that didn't comply with the rule. There's no way that I could, vote to approve this unless we come up with some way make sure that there's not going to be non-compliance of those two groups going forward.
Bring it up.
Byron, I don't know.
How many of these meetings have you been to, Troy?
Well, you caught me off guard. You move a lot quicker than John Bear.
Do you see any rack chairs sitting up there?
No, I don't. I'll pull one up.
Byron, I don't know what that might look like specifically for these groups, but we've had the conversations throughout the audit process this year, obviously. If we needed to do something more formally, we could probably look at that.
Was that something, Greg, you could talk to or something like that? You know, it's a rule violation, and we accept it. You know, how can we accept, you know, something that's not in compliance with the rule?
Greg Hansen, Utah Attorney General's office. We could look in the conservation permit rule and see if it speaks directly as far as ramifications for non-compliance. My recollection of the rule is that there's not any specific description within the rule about how to deal with a situation like this. The audit process, I think, has uncovered and remedied the minor violations that we uncovered. And I think the recommendation from the division at this point is that the minor rule violations that we did uncover have been addressed. And so I think from the board's perspective, if you guys have an alternative proposal or alternative direction, it could include proposed rule changes to the conservation permit rule that would detail what we need to look at in a future situation like this. As far as a response to past violations, I think Kenny's spot on that you know, future permit determinations might be an option for the board to look at, but as far as accepting the audit or not accepting the audit at this point, what's done is done from my perspective. And maybe Director Fowlks or Assistant Director Canning could speak from the division's perspective if they have an alternative position.
Just so I'm clear there, Byron, you suggested that you couldn't accept the audit. It's not a problem with the audit. What you're suggesting is it's just not a problem with the audit. It's a problem with the procedure, that what we should do with the audit.
Right.
And so I think that's what Greg's explaining to us, is that
not quite as eloquent as you did.
I don't take commingling of funds as something. This is their first year or second year of a group doing that, but they've been doing it for over 20 years. To commingle funds, it's in direct violation of what the rule says.
But again, that's not an audit problem. That's something we ought to discuss about that's why we do an audit, is to find those. But it wouldn't.
And Kenny did a good job bringing everything forward to us and pointing out what it is, and just. But it's a valuable program. I don't want to see nothing happen to it, and I just wanted to see it continue to grow and get better. And I think every now and then you need to step back and look at things and make them better, see what we can do to make them better. I know you work hard, and your team works hard to make sure that you help everybody out there, all conservation partners, to get everything in on a timely basis and get it correct. So I want to recommend you on that you're doing a great job that way. It's just
yeah, and like I say, it's people involved, and so there's a lot of variables, and we weren't worried about their situation when it was explained to us. It wasn't super alarming. It was late, obviously. They worked with us. They did try to get it, but so yeah, that is what it is, I guess, at this point.
But this is to give oversight to this whole program and make sure that everybody, the public in general, is confident that we're doing our job. Yep. And you're doing your job to make sure that everything is done right. So I just want to maintain that integrity to the process and make it better. Yep.
So, Director?
Just really quickly, moving forward past this, past the audit, we're going to be coming forward with permit recommendations for the next go-around, and certainly we can address those remediations that have occurred with regard to this audit finding at that point in time, and the board would then be able to make a decision as to what action they would want to take.
That makes sense. I apologize to Troy and everybody else in the audience. We will proceed with the exact same thing that we always do in these meetings, minus our rack chairs. So if you do have a comment that you want to make, please bring us one of these. They're available right here on this front table. Okay, Troy.
I started a trend. I see there's some comments. Nah, Troy Justinson, Sportsman Fish and
If it would have just been you, I wouldn't have apologized. But since it was
no apology
obvious,
needed. Go ahead.
A lapse.
Now, as it's been pointed out here, in my mind, this is the most single important program in the state of Utah for Utah's wildlife. It has far-reaching effects. It has more far-reaching effects than just monetary. It affects jobs. It brings jobs to rural communities. It brings revenue to rural communities. It also provides partnerships. I've been in the fundraising business for 25 years. I deal with volunteers. Volunteers have an ability to help raise in the money, then allocate it and see something done in their backyard is huge. They have inclusion. They have some ownership. It keeps them going. This is absolutely critical. Carl, along your lines, we welcome any change within the accounting process to make this clear, clean cut, and see. I know within Sportsman for Fish and Wildlife, we keep all those funds for every year in one separate account, and then they're allocated. Now, if they get remitted, those are the first funds we use back if that project doesn't get funded. And then we close that account out within 2 years, so we know exactly what's spent and track it forward. But we support any change. We're totally grateful for the opportunity to participate in this program. We'd hate to see it go away. I personally believe it's a huge benefit, more so to the average hunter. You know, a few years ago when the heat was really turned up on this, I kind of looked around at some of the other states, and it's no secret we have more conservation permits than anybody. So I looked to Nevada, and they have a guides program, which they take a percentage of the permits in the state. And in order to put in for those permits, you have to hire a guide. You can't put in just to go hunt it. You have to hire a guide. The number of those permits was almost equal to what we did in Utah. The state of Nevada only got the license fee. We, in a sense, had the same thing, but we turned it into $44 million and then rolled it into $200 million. You tell me what the better program is. Who's missing out? The average guy. We have opportunities in the state for the average hunter solely because of this program. Thank you. Let's keep it going.
Thank you, Troy. Miles, and after Miles, Kyle.
I always have to lower the microphone. Miles Moretti, President and CEO of the Mule Deer Foundation. I echo what Troy says. This is a great program. It is a lot of permits, and there's a lot of money here. We encourage as much transparency through the audit as we can have. In fact, I'm going through my annual nonprofit audit right now, and we welcome that. And also, people have asked, what does this program do? Well, with the watershed initiative here in this state and the leveraging of dollars, there's nowhere in the West that this happens. And people say, well, why don't you just put those tags back in the regular draw? Well, I can guarantee you that chart that was shown earlier with the increase in deer in this state, even though we took a dip this last year, that increase wouldn't have happened without habitat work. I mean, the number one thing that's been identified by the Mule Deer Working Group is the decline of mule deer in the West is habitat. And other states are trying to figure out how to reverse that decline. We've done that here in Utah with the Conservation Permit Program. And we're proud to be a partner with the division, with the Wildlife Board. We also are proud to be part of a partner with the division in the state of Utah with the Expo. It's which bringing notoriety to the Utah on the big game hunting opportunities here in the state, and we're proud partners, and we want to continue this program. And Carl, we'll take all the transparency we can get. I know it's difficult. Kenny, he's got a lot of work to do, But I can also tell you, as you see some of the remaining balances, we sit there all day and fund these projects, and in the project meeting, and those of you that haven't been to that meeting in April when we're funding those, it's hard to spend $1 million and then spread it across the state so that you're fair among the regions and stuff. But this is a tremendous program, and it's great to be a partner. Thank you.
Thank you, Miles. Kyle?
Yes, my name's Kyle. Sorry. My name's Kyle Witherspoon. I'm here on behalf of SEI Utah with regard to this program. I would echo the sentiments of Mr. Justinson and Mr. Moretti. Also, just echo what Mr. Johnson said. This is my second year being involved in the program on behalf of SCI. We changed treasurers just recently, and then the treasurer went on a hunt in Alaska for over a month. That coincided with the timing to create an administrative error on our part. Immediately upon realizing that the error was forthcoming, we contacted the DWR. We told them it was coming. We asked for an official extension. They granted that brief extension, and then we complied with all submissions after that. The check cleared. Everything was good. That said, I think the transparency is absolutely important. I think the fact that SCI erred this year in a minor fashion was important to be reported. We support that finding and we agree with it. I would also echo my apologies and take complete responsibility for the situation. The program is extremely important. We're very proud to be involved with it, and even a minor oversight like this and administrative error will absolutely never happen again. And if the board has any questions for me, I'm also happy to answer them.
I just have a comment. I'd just like to thank you that you did bring it forward on your own behalf. So I recommend, commend you for doing it.
Thank you.
No, I guess that since the whole purpose of the audit is to bring that out so that we know where everything is. It's not necessarily to change the program or to say that there was that there needs to be a different program. The audit is to inform us of where those dollars are and how they got there. So. Okay. Any more comments? Do we have any more cards? Let's go back to board discussion now. If there's any further discussion. Okay, then let's move on to a motion. And now this motion obviously is just concerning the audit, not necessarily the additional things we've discussed here, but the audit.
Just a motion to accept the audit as presented.
If that's what you're moving.
That's what I would move that motion then. Thank you.
Okay. Do I have a second? Okay, have a second with Steve.
So what Carl was talking about, if we approve this, could he make a later motion to be able to further look into those funds?
Yeah, I don't know that the changes that Carl suggested could be I think we'd have to put that on an action log rather than make a formal motion and not vet that through the public process. But I think that Carl would have to put that on a motion or an action log.
Yeah, I think that's a prudent approach. I've been advised by council that this will require a rule change, so putting it on the action log would allow us to formulate a rule change to bring before the board.
Okay. So at this point, we're talking about this audit and whether we will accept that audit. Okay. So I've had a motion and a second. All in favor? Unanimous. Okay. Now, I guess right now would be a good time to do that. Carl, if you have a specific motion that you'd like to make to be placed on the action log, I will entertain that at this point.
Chairman, I'd like to make the motion that we place on the action log and ask them to look at a yearly report starting with the 2017 conservation tag money, that during the time period that's 3 years, that it comes to a zero. So it would be a yearly, I don't know what to call it, a yearly fund audit based on a 2017, and I'll volunteer to work with these folks.
So could we do that without a rule change, Kenny? If we just had an additional slide that showed where those funds were committed and how that would zero the balance without necessarily changing the way that we're doing those funds, because I understand the rollover and the way that you're doing it right now, but if we just had a slide showing commitment and where those funds are going to be used and how that zeros, we could do that without a significant rule change, couldn't we?
I think so. We have templates already that do that very thing for both of these, so we could just expand those a little bit and include them as part of this presentation.
And my hope is exactly that we were 1 or 2 extra slides in this audit that showed we had what all of the amazing things that have happened with the 2017 money. So I
think we can.
Not sure how to do
so
that.
I think as you say, in 2019, by then all of that funds from 2017 would have to be committed, and we could show a slide where all of those funds were committed, where it's gone, and any leftover funds where it's going.
Correct, and it would be spent or committed, so it's both of those categories. Yeah. Correct.
But what I and don't get me wrong, I like this program. I like the groups. I don't think there's anything going wrong. I just want to provide us and these groups some protection to when people say, gosh, look at this melting pot. It just bubbles and bubbles, and we got to be losing the steam. I want to account for that, all of that, and provide us all protection. I'm not against this program. Can we do it without an action log, or
Greg, what are you?
Or where are we at?
Greg Hansen, Attorney General's Office. We were doing a quick review of the conservation permit rule and the sections that describe the types of reporting that the groups have to do, and the section that describes our audit requirements are pretty silent on the type of yearly reporting that you're after. And so my preference would be that we would implement a rule change to clearly describe what you're after, to the extent that the division can change their own internal accounting system. I'll leave that to Kenny. It's kind of an internal operations discussion, but I would like the opportunity to review the rule and decide whether those types of changes would absolutely require a rule change. I think it's appropriate to have them in rule if we go that direction.
To simplify it, Chairman, I will make the recommended motion that we add to the action log a review of the audit process of the conservation tag permits.
It would include a rule change.
It could include a rule change.
Could include, okay.
Could I just make a suggestion to that, that we clearly define the deadlines too when we're doing that at the same time, as to when the money, the 30% money has to be in DWR's bank?
I think that's already clearly defined.
Well, it is, but just the report we got, several of the checks hadn't cleared. The check should basically clear by that deadline, by the 1st.
Yeah, and what the rule says is remitted, Byron. So we could clarify
and that's kind of
that.
ambiguous as to how you want to interpret that. Okay. Kind of like the check's in the mail, but you haven't got it yet, and it hasn't cleared your bank yet.
So the motion will leave it very general in a review of the auditing of the conservation permit program.
Okay, is that clear enough for you, Greg?
With the discussion we've had, that's clear enough. Thank you.
Kenny? Okay. All right, I have a motion. Do I have a second? Kevin seconds that. All in favor? Appears to be unanimous. So added to the action log is a review of the audit process and any rule change that needs to be made in order to make that 2-year window more clear. Okay. All right. Thank you. Staci, you're next. Action item number 7.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm Staci Coons. I'm
How
the
come
Wildlife
everybody
Board
leaves when you
Coordinator.
get up here, Staci?
I have that effect. I can clear a room. It's not a bad thing. I am here
You
to
look
present the
good
2018
in that
meeting
jacket,
dates.
by the way.
Thank you. I wanted to be part of the Cool Kids Club.
It's
So.
pretty sharp.
Thank you. And brown's not my color. So there you go. Anyway, I'm here to present the 2018 RAC and Wildlife Board meeting dates for next year. I won't go over each individual date since they were included in your packet. They're very similar to the dates we had this year. We stayed with 6 meeting dates. There's 2 notable changes. Your meeting in January was originally scheduled for January 4th. We've asked to move that to January 11th to accommodate for winter WAFWA. And then there is a Central Region RAC meeting that would have fallen on July 24th. And those employees don't like working the holidays, so we're asking you to move that one to the 26th. So they'll just hold their meeting on Thursday of that week instead of Tuesday. So that was the only notable changes from this year till next year. And that's what I'm asking for.
Thank you, Staci. Any questions for Staci? Uh-oh.
Is there a hunt during the muzzleloader deer hunt? Okay.
Is there a meeting? Yes.
Yes, there is.
Okay, I don't. Any public questions that we need to entertain or comment? Okay, I'll call for a motion then.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, a second? Steve has a second. All in favor? So that means everyone will be there on those dates, whether they have a muzzleloader tag or not, right?
Exactly. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Staci. Okay, number 8, Darren, if you would come up and talk to us about a proposal to create a Furbearer trapping rule working group.
Right. Darren DeBlois.
Sorry, I just stole your whole thing, didn't I?
That's all I need to say, right? As you all know, there were some private land concerns through the process of going through the trapping rule. And due to those concerns, we're recommending or requesting that the board establish a working group to address some of those specific concerns and give stakeholders a chance to have a discussion about maybe some things we could do in rule that would help to accommodate livestock producers and their need to control predators on their property. So that's what we're requesting. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions from the board?
Thank you. Appreciate that.
That's not a question.
That's a comment. Thank you.
Any questions from the public? I do have one comment card from the public. So if Al, if you would come.
Al Robb with the Utah Trappers Association. I just wanted to, after the process of a month ago when this thing was passed, I didn't know the full parameters of it and didn't realize that it was going to impact landowners the way it has and the way it will. I have one question, all due respect to Darren and Justin and Marty, but I have one question pertaining to Marty's statement about the Fourth Amendment covering the division on stepping on the toes of private landowners. And I think that needs to be clarified by either a court case or an addendum or whatever the case may be as to how that gives the division the authority to do that, especially when the coyotes and raccoons and other non-protected species are under the auspices of the Utah Department of Agriculture. I'm concerned about the impact it can have on trappers, legal ones. I'm really concerned about that as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Alan. I think that's exactly why we're going to address this in a working group so that all those questions can be answered and a much more complete process can be undertaken. So, is that right, Darren? Why'd you sit down?
I know I should have stayed up. Yes, that's correct, and that's something that was missing from the process before. Is you can't have a lengthy discussion in one of these public meetings, so we want an opportunity to do that with stakeholders.
Oh, I think we proved you wrong. We had a lengthy
we did have a lengthy
discussion
maybe not lengthy
in this.
enough.
In this.
So, yeah.
But you're right, and so you know, personally, I have no problem with a working group. We do it with others, and it's very successful. I think it's an extension of the public process that helps us understand better and vet all of those concerns, so that when you come through that public process, you have a more refined proposal for us. So, any comments from the board?
Yes, yeah, I got some comments. I probably, right after that, leading up to the board meeting and right after the board meeting, I've probably had more phone calls and more questions and concerns on this item than I ever had in the, 6 years I've been on this board. It pushed a lot of buttons from a lot of people, a lot of agencies. Commissioner Adams from the Department of Ag and Food called me and says, what exactly happened there? She had some major concerns with that. And so with that, I'm glad I wish we would have postponed it, and so we don't have to go back and change the rule if that's the way it goes. But with that, having this working group is great. Put it together. Let's see what happens. With that said, what happens to the rule? Are we enforcing the rule? Are we not enforcing the rule? I mean, it's in the book. It's
Yep.
The rules.
Well, I haven't read it in the book, but I read it online. I mean, a rule's a rule, but are we going to kind of put that on hold until
We're going to emphasize education during this first year of implementation, just to make sure that people are aware that the rule changed and what those changes mean. And so, kind of a slow roll. And in the meantime, we'll be having this working group that can recommend any possible tweaks we may need to make.
I think there was I made the comment in the board meeting after the rule passed. Go easy for the first little while on everybody. Let's not go out there with a big sledgehammer and start smacking people that are that may not know.
Right, and it never was our intention. As you mentioned, this is, and I'll take full responsibility for this. Some of these private land issues were in my blind spot, and we just didn't give it the consideration that we should have, looking in hindsight. And so we're aware of that. Our intent was never to prevent livestock producers from being able to protect their herds, and so we'll be sensitive to those issues.
Good. Yeah, I was the same way. On the onset, you look at it and think, well, this isn't that big a deal. But when you start peeling the layers back, all of a sudden it became a big deal.
Right. It seems obvious now, but at the time,
And for the record, you did propose to push it on.
Right.
I disagreed with you, but
yes, you did
propose.
as a matter of fact. So, okay.
Any other additional?
How big of a working group? Do you have an idea of who, what, how, why,
given
when?
Past experience, I think the more the merrier. I think we would need to make sure that everybody with a stake in this issue is at the table. Having said that, working groups that are too big or get to be
right. You don't want to get too big, or you don't accomplish anything.
I think obvious members would be, we probably want a RAC member. I'd suggest that a board member be included on, and then some other obvious picks would be Farm Bureau, Trappers Association, probably some of the other conservation groups, SFW. I don't want to leave anybody out, but those are just some things that come to mind off the top of my head. But what we'll do is we'll sit down internally and decide who needs to be at the table and make sure that everybody's there that needs to be there.
Okay.
To get it on the record, Department of Ag should be a member of that too.
Yes. Right. Yeah. That would be great. So are we looking at doing this? Obviously, sooner than later. The sooner we can get started in this.
I think depending on how it goes today, if the board is amenable to this recommendation, we'd start right away to get a group together and start while it's fresh in everybody's mind. The issues and things. I think sooner rather than later would be good.
All right, great.
Any additional comments? I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move we accept that proposal that we have the division put together a working group to look at, revisit, however you want to word it, the trapping rule that we passed in the last board meeting.
But to be clear, we're not necessarily just looking at the trapping rule. We're putting together an entire Furbearer trapping rule working group, right?
I suppose.
Okay.
I can say that's where it falls. It falls under there. So yeah, it would be that whole working group.
I guess we did pass the entire rule.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a motion. Second by Donnie. All in favor? Okay. It's unanimous. Thank you, Darren. So you're going to get to work right away and let everybody know and invite those to be part of that working group.
Just so I'm at the mic, yes, we will do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have other business. Just really quickly, there is a winter WAFWA that Staci mentioned that we're rearranging our board meeting for in the 1st of January. We've asked Byron Bateman to represent us at that WAFWA, and he said that he would represent us. So Staci, if you would make those arrangements. I don't think that that isn't an action. That's just an invitation from the board and knowledge that he has been to several of those and has represented us well and brought that information back to us that has been important. Byron, do you want to comment on what that is and let anybody know that doesn't what WAFWA is really briefly?
Well, I kind of gave a highlight of that at our last board meeting, but it's 22 western states and 3 Canadian provinces that we meet a couple of times a year. We have a winter and a summer WAFWA, and there's a national, which is AFA, which Mike mentioned. They just came here and stuff like that in Utah. But the different commissioners from the other states and board members, like I said, there's only Utah and Alaska are the only ones that are classified as board members. All the other states classify, board members as commissioners. But we get together and talk about various issues and stuff like that that's, confronting other states and stuff like that. It's kind of like Justin brought up about the shed antler hunting, kind of what we did to the other states with no heads up when we closed the state of Utah and our people went off to the other states and stuff like that. But we worked through common solutions and stuff like that and, try to come up with the best practices that's being done in other states and incorporate those into our state. In addition to that, we give an update as to what, different things we're doing in the state of Utah, working on and stuff like that. And it's pretty, exciting for me to go there, and we got a report that says that, we handled 1,350 different animals last year and stuff like that. And the different things we're doing through our habitat projects, like we had this talk about conservation permits, how important that is. And just let other states know what's going on and stuff like that, because we have a lot of similarities, and in any kind of group, the more people you can get on your, with you and exchange ideas and stuff, you can learn a lot. So, just quick overview. That's what WAFWA consists of, and it's got lots of different partners that support that. Mule Deer Foundation was a big supporter in Colorado this past year, and Miles and the Mule Deer Foundation did a really great job on that as far as supporting WAFA and all the people that attended. There's over 400 attendees there at that WAFA meeting in Colorado this past summer. So it is important that the state's there and represented to, get our position across what we're doing and find out what we can do better.
Thank you, Byron. Any other business or comments before we?
Where's it held? Where's it going to be in January?
Where'd Staci go?
San Diego.
San Diego, again.
Sure. Yeah. Pick Byron to go.
There's no snow and no line hunting there.
We punished him and made him go.
Hog tie me and drag me.
30th, November 30th. Okay. So, with no other business, there is other business that I don't know about. There is other business that I do know about.
I'm just going to remind you about it. So in looking at your letter that you received from the Doppel board, John Baer did sit on the Guides and Outfitters licensing board for Doppel. He, of course, has come off the board. So they do replace him. They requested applications from us back in January, which is when, under Director Sheehan, we had submitted 2 nominations. And he had me submit Byron Bateman and Donnie Hunter. She's currently asking for 3. So I need to, unless your thoughts have changed on who we've already submitted, I need an additional name. They do meet 4 times a year, and they do meet here in Salt Lake.
So they're asking for members of our wildlife board.
We do generally have a member of the wildlife board sit on that board. Yes, that is the standard.
But you're just saying amongst the board we need another name? You've already
She would like to
submitted
select from 3 names instead of 2. And then just one of you will
Does
serve.
that mean she doesn't like the 2 that we submitted? I'm just saying.
I don't really want to go down that road.
So no, I already got a letter saying that I was appointed to the Guides and Outfitters.
Then we're done here.
So I got another letter asking there's another position that's available, and they want recommendations for that other position. So apparently there is.
And
no
that's what
voting and stuff like that.
that's what I understood from that letter, is that they're asking for our recommendations for an empty seat.
Did she send? There's no criteria in here as far as.
No, that's all I got was that letter.
Okay.
So
Well, then congratulations to your appointment. Sorry, Donnie, you didn't win. The rest of you didn't even get considered, and I will give her a call.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so any other comments or something else that I knew that I didn't know? Okay, we're adjourned till November 30th. Yes. Yeah, there.